So we put a shout out in our LinkedIn pages to, has anyone got any topics that they fancy sort of chewing the fat over? And that you sort of bit our arm off.
I did. Well, Erica just came and I was like, yeah, that was what was on my mind at the moment, but I'm really happy to flex if other people would like to talk about something else.
No, Natalie.
No.
Let's do it.
Is it? What's the top? What is it? What is the topic?
We said it was the difference in behaviours, wasn't it, between men and women at work?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, don't want to go too controversial here. They all get like, what is it? Ghosted or cancelled?
Cancelled, yeah.
Yeah, cancelled, right? I was saying to Erica, one thing that's like occurred to me over the last few weeks more and more, simply because I'm feeling the pain a bit. Maybe let's not put this public. It's just how, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong or not, but like for me as an individual at work, what really is important are things like listening, connection, relationships, seeking to understand, partnership, finding ways together to make things better. And that's like, especially as I get older and the more that I work, I guess, that's just even more of a kind of need that I personally have. And I was just interested, want to know, I guess, kind of more like from Jo and Erica, how they experience that. But also, does anyone ever ask men kind of how they experience that or what their needs are from that perspective as well? Do men even have those same needs? I'm fascinated and I'm interested because I think sometimes in the workplace, there can be quite a lot of frustration, I think, actually, and energy that's wasted as a result of kind of, people's needs not being met in that way. So that's what it was about. That was my, but happy to flip subjects, happy to flip if wanted.
Who wants to kick us off then?
I'm happy to. That won't surprise the people that know me better. So needs analysis and ways of working is really interesting. I think that it takes a level of trust that in some workplaces has to be more earned than in other workplaces to be able to have an honest conversation about what I need at work. I think particularly because it strays into that, oh my God, we're going to have a talk about emotions ground. Couldn't possibly do that. And I think second, because and certainly the hair isn't really this colour. In my experience, some of the career expectations over sort of 25, 30 years in the industry is really, really interesting. So when I started, in probably the first 15, 20 years, there used to be this race with women, pre-30, you didn't take holidays. If you were ambitious, you worked as hard as you could because you needed to get as far up the food chain as you could before you took time out to have kids so that you didn't get jumped while you were out on maternity leave. And I noticed, so when I noticed this, I didn't know if it was no sleep that had had 3 kids in really short succession and I was hallucinating, whether it was a real thing. So when I was interviewing people, I asked them. And what I found was that a lot of the men gave me answers that were really considered, thoughtful, multi-year plan approach to their career, which is they were accepting of the fact that they might be in a job for 5 years, then they might become a supervisor, then they might become a manager, and then they might go further or they might not, but they saw their career very holistically as in a very long time, and the sense of urgency that a lot of women I interviewed wasn't there in men in the same way for the same reasons. And that gave me one of my first insights. And I think that when you come from such a different place, if you don't have a reorientation as to why you need what you need and what you're hoping to achieve, we will be starting from too far apart to even have that conversation in the first place. And I do think that certainly when I have that conversation with people, it opens up a different set of conversations that lead into how we behave with each other and how we work. Last thing before I shut up, everybody has to have the same reaction to behaviours that we won't accept. Otherwise, all behaviours are accepted.
Yeah.
That point about sort of knowing that you're going to at some point take maternity leave, so therefore Are you saying that there's therefore a greater hunger for progression for women because they know that it's time boxed?
Absolutely. Yep. And you know, we'll work no holidays, every hour in the day, you know, really fight to get promoted. Certainly in my generation, that was a definite MO.
Yeah, I completely, do you know what, it really strikes a chord hearing you say that, Jo. I have what Abbas knows, you know, I've always been really driven and ambitious, and a lot of that is to do with my background and where I kind of, if I didn't make it on my own, I didn't drive myself out of that, I was going to be stuck in it. So that's kind of how I was wired, and then some other life experiences made me more like that. And I felt that pressure that you're talking about so much. I didn't actually take really any maternity leave. So I had 2 babies. Well, I had my first one at 20 and went back within 12 weeks. Then I had the second 2, 13 months apart, and went back to work 2 weeks after having both of them.
Was that a conscious decision?
It was a conscious decision. Yeah, 100%. I was like, I want to be back at work. Like, I'm not taking time out. And it was that absolutely, I'm going to fail. I'm going to slip behind. I'm not going to get to where I need to. You know, and that fear of failure and not being able to achieve where I need to get to, still not there yet, is just what kept me driving. And I didn't feel like, you know, I could take a year, right? The thought terrified me. And so I'm very much, and I do, like you know, really see this difference today where, wow, it's not just acceptable for women to take time off and be open, you know, but for guys to do the same as supportive partners or maybe be the lead parent. And I think when you reflect back on that, you know, the world has changed significantly. But yeah, looking back, what you've said really, really resonates. And I have been one of those women.
Does that impact then your behaviours, I guess your overarching behaviours at work?
Yep, of course it does.
Because there's an underlying thirst for basically progression before it's cut off. And like you said, then all of a sudden you have those, I guess, colleagues that aren't going to be taking leave, then leapfrogging you while you're off.
Yeah, of course it does. Because if you're working alongside people that have a 20-year plan to get to somewhere that you want to get to in 3, it changes everything. It changes how you see everything. It changes every discussion you have. You actively moderate how you're going to respond to things, because you don't have, and I'm going to use this word provocatively, you don't have the luxury of time where you won't allow yourself the luxury of time to deal with things in a different way.
And also sometimes it's not acceptable for women, or hasn't been, to deal with those things maybe, or respond to those things, react to things, or even use the language around things that is perfectly acceptable for guys to use. You know, a few weeks ago I was talking to someone and I described myself as being ruthlessly focused on prioritization, which I am, as some of you will know. And the reaction that I got from this guy was like, I couldn't use that word as a guy. So, you know, you shouldn't be using that word. Like, why do you think it's okay to? And literally, you know, and Simon, your face there is like, really? But yeah,
Ruthless we can't use the word ruthless.
Literally, I think I used the word ruthless in relation to prioritization, nothing else, but really using data to let drive. And it was like, whoa, you can't say that. You can't use that word. People are going to have a reaction and be scared, you know, almost scared if you start to use words and language like that. And I'm like, wow, is this where we are now? And I don't know, again, Erica, Jo, what your experience is with that, but in terms of, yeah, not having the luxury to have those same reactions or to really have to think about your language, or the most punishing thing I think I found is really having to minimize yourself. And the minimizing, Jo's nodding, the minimizing that I have done, I'm 44 now, so over the last, I guess, like 20 odd years, the minimizing that you do in order to kind of be that acceptable type of woman, i.e. not too demanding, not too difficult, not too manipulative, not too, you know, there's all of this words and language that you kind of, I feel I've spent a lifetime to some extent like trying to be that, you know, the good girl that will fit in and will kind of not be too provocative, be pushing things, but still in quite a polite way. And I don't know. And I look back and I just think it's really, for me anyway, personally, at this stage, I almost feel quite saddened that I've had to minimize myself sometimes in that way.
Yeah, and it, you know, and it's interesting because it'll be you know, blabbed away as, but they're the choices that you made. Yeah, good, because of course the socio-economic climate and the gender politics of the time that I grew up in and worked in have got absolutely nothing to do as external, you know, factors on my behaviour. Of course, it was all about my choices. But it is interesting, and I think that one of the things that I am very protective of is language, and I will actively describe myself as a raving radical feminist with pride. I also use the R word and am ruthless about some things. And I'll also use the F word as in ferocious about some things. And now I will not apologise to anybody. I will leave a job before I'll apologise now.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time to get there.
Yeah.
You know, to have faith in myself that I'm eminently more employable than anybody that won't accept me the way that I am. That's a big statement to say, and you don't hear many women saying it.
Has it made a difference to the industry sectors that you've worked in? Because I've worked in a few that felt more equal, and I've worked in a few that didn't.
I was just going to say, because something you said earlier, Natalie, about, you know, that it's changed. But I think where I used to work as an estate agent in sales, it's the same. It's still the same. There's not much movement in the, like, you know, in the way that men and women are and the way they behave in those situations, because you're not just dealing with people in the office, you're dealing with the public as well, and they have a perception of you. So I feel that which is one of the reasons why I left that industry, was because it's still quite backwards in that regards.
It's an interesting one.
So how would that affect you? Oh, sorry, Simon.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, Erica, so how did that affect you, those behaviours? What was that like that made you leave?
Well, without going too much into it, but it can be very, what's the word, without saying the S word, I'm just going to say it's quite sexist. Yeah, it was very much the similar situation where you have to push yourself that bit further, because I used to see people, like younger boys, being promoted around me, and I had to push myself to get noticed, or I had to physically go in and speak to directors and say, right, I want this, and you're going to give it to me, and I want it for this much money, and then they would take notice. But it did affect me. But I mean, you've got to be quite thick-skinned anyway, so
yeah,
you just deal with it, don't you?
So I'm just thinking back to the topic. So the topic was about the difference in behaviours between sort of men and women. So how does that, I guess, how does that drive different behaviours? Are men able to be a little bit more relaxed? Is that what we're saying? I mean, I've kind of taken it for granted that I didn't believe in a lot of modern industries there was inequality still, but clearly, you know, I've seen an article recently where there's still, you know, quite a difference in pay gap, which seems mad to me that it still exists. Surely that's of previous generations. So, you know, I've worked for some very sort of, you know, I worked for Pfizer for a while, so probably, you know, 60-70% of the people in the office were female. So how can that possibly still be a place where, you know, where there's differences in pay, when actually, and, you know, Diageo was, you know, very female dominated, and therefore how can things like gender pay gap still exist? It confuses me.
I think, again, I'll talk from personal experience here. I think, again, you know, part of our conditioning as women is, you know, you're not, well, I certainly wasn't brought up to be kind of challenging, asking, you know, I'm going to use the word demanding, but in a positive way, right? You know, knowing my value, demanding what I'm worth, and, you know, not being flexible on that, and really setting my stall out, really certain of all of those things. You know, I think I've got a teenage daughter now, And I really, really hope that I can instill and coach and support her to be able to do the things that I haven't been able to do probably until I've been in my early 40s, when I'm actually, to Jo's point, confident in my ability, know my value. But nevertheless, as a woman, and I think the guys that know me, Abbas knows me really well, people would describe me as a strong and confident woman. But when it comes to things like matters of financial negotiation, I personally can really understand why we've got gender pay gap in more senior roles. Because from a conditioning perspective, my own experience is not set up for success, not trained, not coached, just not brought up. And also, one of my girlfriends sent me a picture of a mug last year, and on it says, "Today, carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre middle-aged white man," or something, right? It's just classic. And it's like, yes, why wasn't I born with that bone in my body, right? Because I just think you guys are blessed in some ways, because I just think you've got this rod that, unless we really work hard with our daughters and other younger women, we don't naturally have that. I didn't anyway. Jo and Erica, I'd love to know what you feel about that.
Same. I think there's a wider sociological context around sort of like the family man living wage, and if we look at the macroeconomic environment, there's a huge expectation of families, and it's only really recently in time that there's been encouragement for both people to work. It's been on off between wars, post wars, shortages. Go back home, look at the 50s, it was all aprons and little waists again when they needed to give all the jobs back to the men that came back from the war. So there's been all different kinds of cycles in society, but the one constant is that men have always been entitled to have jobs first from a society, in a societal context. And the behaviour that breeds over a series of generations does link into the confidence and the conditioning between those who feel that they have to work, and that's a double-edged sword. So my husband doesn't. He stays home and looks after the kids, and I work. And he thinks I'm the best thing since sliced bread, mainly for that reason, but for other reasons as well, I hope.
We don't need to go into that.
But and his parents, it took them like 8 years before they'd tell anybody that was our setup, because they just couldn't get their heads around it. Yeah. So his dad used to bring him cuttings, jobs that he could apply for, and he's sitting there, with 3 babies at one stage, going, kind of busy dad. And it got to the point where his parents were so worried about him, they cut out, my husband's really shy, so I'm not going to tell you his name, but they cut out a cutting from the local paper, we live in Stratford, about volunteer gladiators to just walk on stage in costume at a show at the RSC, saying it might help him get back into the workforce. and that really says a lot, because there was just a huge expectation that as a middle-aged white guy, how could he not work? And I think that behaviour of entitlement sometimes isn't a malicious, driven, secret behaviour of entitlement. It can also be a really heavy weight around men's necks. And I think that the more that we push for everything to be available to women, we also have to push for the flip side to everything to be available to men, so that we do co-parent, we do job share, we do offer the same flexibility for 2 men to be able to care for children, if nothing else than because of, it really embraces the gay community and the LGBTQ plus community, that everybody has those entitlements. And I think that from a behaviours perspective, it's really interesting when you find examples to talk about where there is a man who can't wait to not have the 9-to-5 grind thrust in his face, that's what he has to do to provide. It allows you to have different conversations. So my husband gets banded around a load as an example.
I've got a couple of friends who are sort of stay-at-home fathers, and certainly, they have mentioned that people are often sort of look at them in a funny way when they sort of say, this is what we do. It's like, oh, as if somehow they've failed. So, so
I would say that's how John's parents looked at him, like something was wrong, you know, and they're worried about him, worried what would happen to him if he didn't work. But he had a lot of jealousy, you know. Plus, he also thought he'd play a lot of golf. He hasn't played a game. He's been a bit busy.
that sort of expectation thing, that I mean, that things like in Scandinavia, they have sort of, you know, they've got paternity leave.
Yep.
So I mean, I as a permanent employee, I couldn't have taken paternity leave, so I actually took time off. I quit jobs to take 3 months off after each child, simply because then, you know, I wouldn't have to argue it or beg for it. It was just a thing. So so I did that for both boys. And that, I guess, would have been quite nice for that to have been fair both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife and I took 6 months together when our son was born, and we were both just off for the same time, and it was awesome. But that has really informed how we've made all parenting decisions from that point on, because from that, it's always 50-50. We take alternating days doing, you know, the responsibilities for the same stuff. And it really stood out to me when he was first born, and we were in a restaurant with some friends and he needed his nappy changing, and I was like, yeah, fine. I just went and did it. And a lot of the women around the table, some of whom were expecting, were like, oh my God, isn't he so amazing to be going and changing a nappy? And we were like, well, no, that should just be the norm. And it's a shame that that's not the case.
Even your generation, though, still that's I just kind of figured it was, you know.
I think
it's
gets passed
lessened.
down, though, doesn't it? It just gets passed down through your parents, doesn't it?
It's the behaviours that you model, yeah.
Yeah.
So on that note, then, is the world changing? Is it not changing fast enough? Is it getting there?
I think it's slow.
I think it's got to be slow, because before this call I was thinking there's nothing really, the same as what Simon said. Listen, how can we still have a you know, gender pay gap? And I know I've been quite quiet during this, but honestly, it's been absolutely enlightening. And I've already in my head got a whole bunch of things that I'm going to do differently. Natalie, when you said that you had to minimize yourself to fit in, my whole career, I've been trying to maximize myself, right? Because, you know, to say, well, but then I've been able to do that, right? And I didn't even know that happened, that you had to do that. So it's got to be slow, because I kind of feel that I'm quite a progressive person. I feel that I am, but if I'm not seeing it, then there are going to be a lot less progressive people out there that are also not seeing it more than me. So yeah, I agree with you. It's got to be slow.
Maybe it's just a lack of awareness. That thing about sort of, you know, the hunger. I kind of, as you were talking, Jo, about sort of the hunger of sort of management to go up the chain and go quickly. I can think now of lots of bosses that were quite driven, lots of female bosses that were quite driven when I was younger, and all of a sudden that explains a whole load of traits that they had that I would have viewed as a degree of ruthlessness. That I found that quite interesting, actually, because with that sort of, you know, with that sort of making sort of, you know, accepting everyone else's behaviours, or at least understanding that mutual understanding, when you get where people are coming from, it all of a sudden it stops you, I guess, thinking the worst when you see certain things.
Yeah. And the amount of organisation and coordination that woman will take on, you know. So we often talk in a conversation and we teach people not to rush in and fill that gap, you know, love an awkward silence, you know, just dig it. There is the same thing with work and tasks and things to do at work that need to be done. And women will always, in my experience, you know, hand right up every time I say my experience, rush to coordinate and organise and take on more, because you just got to get it done. But also they do more at home. We all know that. That's pretty much still the same trait. And, you know, heaven forbid any woman works part-time, like that's a real thing. And that translates into a lot of behaviours at work. One, we've spoken about the driven. The other, if you like, contrary behaviour that I've opposed, and one thing that I would agree, it's too slow. I don't agree it has to go slow at all. I think that's fallacy, with a PH rather than an F. I think that one of the things that's really interesting is we have in a lot of institutions, you know, and I work in FS, but I have worked in some other industries. There's this whole, and I'm going to call it public is private school over here, isn't it? You call it public school. Yeah. So there's this public school mentality. And I've come across it in a lot of jobs where, and it's not just limited to men at all, but it's when you grow up in an institution, so take 5-7 years, take school, and your first year at school, you're everybody's gopher. You're the bottom of the bottom, you're the apprentice, the newbie. You have to go and learn everything, be everybody's go-to gopher, get the coffee, all the rest of it. Over X period of time, you work your way up into a level of seniority. So suddenly you're the one who can, I'm not going to say boss, but you're the one who bosses everybody around. You tell, you know, the 7-year-olds or the 13-year-olds to go and get your stuff. You know, change is hard because by the time you claw yourself up or you've done your time and you get to that position where you're in a period of seniority, the head boy, the head girl, you can order the others around, you're not going to, you know, do the turkey and vote for Christmas, are you? And that's what we're asking in the workplace, is for all these people who have made themselves bigger, who have maximized, who have had really successful careers, who've also done, you know, 5, 10, 15 years to get to where they are. We're asking them to turn turkey and vote for Christmas by changing things when they've just got to the top. And that's hard, and it takes a very special critical mass of people to help us make that happen. That would be go.
Do you think there's been a shift in the last few years specifically? I'm thinking in the wake of, you know, Me Too, Black Lives Matter. There's been like a number of social movements, particularly that focus on inequality on a number of socioeconomic fronts. Do you think that that is, for me, I saw that as moving the needle in a way that hasn't really happened in my living memory? And I just wondered if you would agree with that, or if you have maybe felt a shift, or if it hasn't really trickled down.
So I would say that perhaps after Stephen Lawrence, people were having the same kind of conversation, and yet we still had it 20 years later with George Floyd.
I think you see like a lot of, this is my view, it might be controversial, but I think you see a lot of bandwagoning after that stuff, and a lot of kind of quick action, to your point around fill the space, you know, we've got to be seen to be doing something. And so you see lots of kind of EDI groups and such like, but actually, to Jo's point, and Erica's, the endemic behaviour and beliefs that existing people, they don't change as a result of something out there happening. The changes to happen in here. And, you know, when those beliefs are, you know, part of your DNA, you've grown up with them, then, you know, what does it take to change that? Actually, you know, external events can create awareness around it, but I think it takes a lot more than that. And often it's maybe impossible, actually. By the time we get to a certain stage in life, you know, our ideas, I think, are pretty fixed. So it just becomes harder.
We were having a conversation about organisational culture a week or two ago, because we often go sort of places and then might revisit them a few years later, and sometimes the entire department will have changed. So certainly when I went to the FCA and the FSA, like pretty much the entire department had changed, but yet the way they did things and their behaviours and how they looked, and you know, it was the same. It was totally different people, and it was the same. And I found that really interesting. And we've, you know, as agilicists, we've revisited several places, and I find it very interesting when all the people have changed, but the behaviours are the same. And sometimes is it actually the only way to have that change, rather than it be gradual, because they inherit behaviours from elsewhere, is for there to be a cull. And I'm not suggesting we cull men.
Is the leadership changing, Simon? Is the leadership changing, or is it the leadership that are asking?
Sometimes the entire leadership team have gone.
Okay.
Sometimes it's pretty much like, you know, it's an 80% contractor and the entire department have gone. but yet they seem to be, it seems to feel like the same place. And it's not just the building, there's inherited behaviours and traits that they have, which is, an organisation seems to have a personality and a culture. Maybe that's a different talk, but I wonder if, you know, you talking about inherited behaviours from men to men or different generations, there needs to be some form of catalyst, otherwise it just continues.
Yeah, and you know, certainly legislation, you know, and the penalties for bad behaviour, but we don't have a universal intolerance of bad behaviour, and that shows. So, you know, to Graham's point before around, you know, I didn't mean to be trite with my answer, and of course when we bring in legislation that makes it transparent to tell people how much you pay women versus men for the same job, when we bring in that it's a, you know, criminally prosecutable offence to do a hate crime, when we bring in protected rights for all people regardless of, you know, what makes you special, you know, across the board, those things absolutely help. But all they're doing is bringing everybody else up to the same starting position. Don't any of us be disillusioned by the fact that it's creating a level playing field. It's only just saying you're allowed to play the game.
I'm conscious of the time, so we've got another session that we've got to do.
Can I just quickly do it? I've got one last question, right? So it sounds like what we've spoken about here is that a lot of this is generational. I like a lot of actually putting this into practice. It is generational, and maybe that's why it's slow moving. So as a parent to a young child, what can I do for people that are not set in their ways, that are more malleable? What are the behaviors that you think I can model, or that other people can model, and then embed in that generation to continue to propagate change? I know that's a
really
lot,
good question.
but if you, I don't know, but just if there's anything that springs to mind of, like, I don't know, what's the one thing or the bullet point? I don't know.
Do you have a son or a daughter, Graham?
A son.
You have a son. I have two sons and a daughter, and I'm a single parent with my children, and have been for over a decade. But with my sons, I'm always, I mean, hey, this is my parenting and what I do with them, but I'm always trying to, you know, get them to understand and see from a woman's perspective. And I'm always kind of catching their language, actually. You know, I'll educate them on things like, I'm going to go down the radical feminist route here, Jo. I'll talk to them about misogyny, and I'll talk to them about what that means and what that feels like and what impact that has on women. And we will talk about periods in this house. And, you know, when the boys say things like, oh, it's your period, you know, that type of language and that type of behaviour, it's like, well, actually, let's talk about that. And what women have to go through in life. You know, yes, they start periods. Yes, they have children. Yes, they hit the menopause. Zach and Gabriel, you are going to go through life pretty much, might waver a little bit, but, you know, you're not going to have those peaks and troughs probably to the same extent. So for me, it's about awareness with my sons, and it's about education, and it's about being a really strong role model for them, actually, as a woman, because ultimately I want them to go and marry, partner with other strong, you know, confident women as well. So I think, yeah, that's my approach: awareness and education. Jo, my different view.
So I celebrate all of that completely. The one thing that I would add is be curious. Don't assume, ask.
That's very good. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for your time this week. Yeah, it's been quite an enlightening conversation. So
I'm surprised Ab's been that quiet, to be honest with you.
The quietest I've been for half an hour in my whole life. If that was the only task, well done. You achieved it.
I mean, we're gonna get you guys to turn up more regularly now to all of our meetings.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your
Thank
time.
you very much, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.
Take care. Bye.